Hey, what is going on, guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the patch 10.9 changes and discussing how the changes will affect each of the champions' placement in the meta for the coming patch. So if we jump right into it, Cho'gath getting an E damage increase from 22 to 70 up to 22 to 84. So once you get that maxed out, if you're playing tank Cho'gath, you're going to have 14 extra damage at max rank, technically 42 extra damage if you're able to get every single proc of your E off on the opponent because you do have 3 charges. If you are playing AP Cho'gath though, this change really doesn't matter at all. It's not a buff at all to Cho'gath. If you do go for the glacial setup into the GLP and the twin shadows, you max Q out first with that setup, you max W second. So this change here really isn't going to matter at all if you're playing that kind of Cho'gath, but if you are a tank Cho'gath player, if you max your E out first, then this is going to be a pretty substantial buff for the coming patch. I don't think it's going to bump him up into S tier or anything, but tank Cho'gath does get a little bit stronger and he will be at least a solid A tier pick for 10.9. So next up here, we have a buff to support Fiddlesticks. His E damage is being increased from 70 to 190 up to 70 to 210. So you're getting a 20 damage increase there on your E once you do get it maxed out. Not a super big change. I think that support Fiddlesticks will still remain a B tier pick in this coming patch. It's not really much of a buff to jungle Fiddlesticks either, because on jungle Fiddlesticks, you're going to be maxing your W out first, your Q second, and not your E till last. So you're barely going to feel this change at all on jungle Fiddlesticks. Support Fiddle though, you do max your E out first, so you're gonna feel it a little bit in this patch here, but the fact that Fiddle is underperforming quite a bit right now in the support role in 10.8, I don't see it being enough to bump him up on the tier list. So next up, we got 2 different buffs to Gnar. His Mega Q, the CD refund on that is being increased from 60% up to 70%, and his Mega's E damage is being increased from 50 to 190 all the way up to 80 to 220. So you're getting a 30 damage increase there on your E at all ranks. So that's actually pretty big. Like the damage increase there just at rank 1 in it does increase your all-in potential in the laning phase, your ability to look for solo kills. So I think that in this patch right now, Gnar is definitely on the edge of A tier, and I think this is the buff he needs to finally push him into that A tier, make him a pretty decent top lane pick. So I do believe Gnar is gonna bump up from B into A for 10.9. So it seems like almost every single patch recently, Kayn has been receiving some sort of a buff, and they've been pretty small buffs overall. They haven't really made him that much greater, so he's getting buffed again here in 10.9. Q cooldown is being decreased from 7 to 5 seconds down to 6 to 4 seconds. His Q bonus damage is now going to apply to minions, so does this mean that top lane Kayn now becomes somewhat viable for 10.9? We'll have to see if that becomes a somewhat niche pick. His W slow is being increased from 70 up to 90%. So I think overall these are decent changes to Kayn, but like the changes he has received in previous patches, I just don't see it being impactful enough to move him up on the tier list. I still think that he is going to remain a B/A tier pick for 10.9. Now for Lissandra, she's getting a partial revert on a nerf she received back in 9.7, back all the way almost a year ago now, or I guess more than a year ago. She got a nerf to her Q, which increased the cooldown from 6 seconds at rank 1 all the way up to 10 seconds, and this change really hurt Lissandra. I think it was one of the changes that kind of killed her in the mid lane back in season 9, and they're giving her a little less cooldown now on that ability. They're not fully reverting it back to 6 seconds at rank 1, but it's now going to be 8 seconds at rank 1 there in it. So I think Lissandra definitely does have a spot in the meta into certain matchups with a lot of assassins being played right now in the mid lane, into certain like melee assassin picks. I can see her being a decent pick at the moment, so I do think with this change she is going to go from B tier up into A tier and be a relatively decent mid lane pick for 10.9. And the final champion receiving a direct buff for 10.9 is Quinn. Her Q nearsight duration, it's being increased from 1.5 seconds up to 1.75 seconds. So if you're a melee bruiser top lane player and you're going up against Quinn, your life is even going to be more difficult for this coming patch and even more annoying to play against this champion. So I have there on the tier list prediction, she's moving from A tier up into S tier. This change alone is not going to do that. The change later on though in the video, the buff to Sanguine Blade, that's also an indirect buff to Quinn. You can run that as a rush item on her. It does very well right now in 10.8, so the fact it's getting buffed here in 10.9 is going to make her even better. So those two changes combined, definitely watch out for Quinn in this patch. She does really well into a lot of the meta bruisers at the moment, into melee bruisers that like don't have a gap closer. She can absolutely smash them in the laning phase, even into bruisers that do have gap closers. You can do a very good job at kiting them out in the laning phase if you take the phase rush on Quinn, which is pretty popular on her at the moment. It's very difficult for any champion to jump onto you and do anything, so look out for Quinn here in 10.9. Now, if we move on to a couple champions getting nerfed here, first one up is Bard. He's getting 2 nerfs to his W, move speed decrease from 50% down to 30%, cooldown increase from 12 seconds up to 14 seconds, and his E cooldown there, it's being increased from 18 to 14 seconds up to 22, scaling down to 16 seconds. So when you really think about it, how often are you casting your E off cooldown with Bard? Is this change really going to matter too much? Oftentimes when you're using your E with Bard, you're not going to be using it like as soon as it comes off cooldown. You're gonna use it to like escape or something, and then you won't be using it for an extended duration usually after that. So I don't see this change being super impactful. Same thing with your W there, especially like early on in the laning phase. You're not usually using that ability like as soon as it comes off cooldown. I could definitely see it being more impactful like later on into the game in mid to late game team fights, but I don't see it being the end of the world for Bard. I feel like you are gonna definitely notice the move speed decrease there from 50% down to 30%, but I think overall, at the very most, these changes drop Bard down into A tier, but honestly, I still see him being an S tier pick in 10.9. Now for Karthus, he is getting a move speed decrease going from 335 down to 325, and although this change might not seem like the biggest change overall, it's definitely going to hurt him in certain situations. It does hurt his clear speed a little bit in the early game. If you're going in for a gank with Karthus and say like you end up killing an opponent in this patch right now with like a max range Q at the very edge of it, hits the opponent and it gets you the kill. Well, in this coming patch here, that would not happen because of the move speed decrease. You wouldn't be in range for that Q and the enemy would have escaped. So in certain situations, this change is definitely going to come into effect, but I don't see it being enough to like drastically change his placing on the tier list. I do still think he is going to remain an A/S tier pick depending on the elo. Now for Wukong, he is getting 3 different nerfs here. Armor is being decreased by 3, going from 34 down to 31. His Q damage is being decreased there by 10 at all ranks, and his W clone damage, it looks like it's being decreased by 5% at all ranks. So I still think these are pretty small nerfs overall for Wukong. Both top lane and jungle Wukong are performing exceptionally well right now in 10.8. So even though these nerfs are somewhat decent, I just still don't see them being enough to drop this champion down into A tier. And then for Nami, she's getting a couple pretty small nerfs here. Base HP being lowered by 14, base mana there being lowered by 11, and then her passive, the move speed on that, is being lowered from 60 down to 45. So in this patch right now, Nami is performing really well. She's definitely one of the best supports in 10.8 at the moment. So these nerfs are going to hurt her a little bit, but I don't think they're going to drop her out of S tier. I think like the Wukong changes, considering how strong the champion is at the moment, even though the nerf there to her passive is somewhat substantial, it's not going to be enough to drop her out of S tier. And then the final champion getting nerfed here is going to be Trundle. His ultimate cooldown increased there by 20 seconds at all ranks. So I think this change is more so targeted towards the competitive scene. I think solo queue Trundle right now is in a pretty balanced spot for 10.8. He's like a low S tier pick at the moment. So with this change though, it is going to drop him down into A tier. 20-second increase there on your ultimate is definitely going to hurt him a little bit in this coming patch. So I think Trundle's still going to be a good jungler. Like if you want to pick him up, if you want to play him, I can still see him being pretty good, especially like as a counter pick to certain meta junglers at the moment, but he is now going to be no longer S tier for 10.9. And then lastly here to round out the video, if we break down the Sanguine blade buffs, cost on the item is being decreased from 3,100 down to 3,000, 80 on the item increased from 50 up to 55. So I don't see the changes being big enough to where we're going to see a bunch of different champions just start to run this item now in 10.9. I do see the change being big enough though to where champions that are already running it in 10.8, they're going to start running it a little bit more now in 10.9, and it is going to make them a bit stronger. So like we talked about earlier on in the video, the Quinn top lane, I think that this is a perfectly viable rush item on her right now in 10.8. A lot of Quinn players are going for it, but Blade Ruin King Rush is definitely the more popular option. So I think that we're going to see a lot more Quinn players now go for this Sanguine Blade as a rush item, and it is going to make her a little bit stronger in 10.9. You also have the Nocturne mid right now who is doing very well with the Sanguine Blade rush, so we're going to see him get a little bit stronger. And then you also do have the Draven down in the bot lane going for the Mana Immune into Sanguine Blade and then Dust Blade. anyways, so that is a bit of an indirect buff to him as well. I don't really see too many other champions getting much stronger. I guess you do have like potentially Tristana in a solo lane looking to go for this as a rush item, or you have something like Vayne top lane going for this as a rush item, but overall I don't see it being too meta breaking. I don't see it being a big enough change to where we're going to see a ton of different champions run this item now in 10.9. So that's going to be it, guys. That's going to round out the video. That is what we're looking at heading into patch 10.9. So if you guys did enjoy the video, be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching. Have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.